Hi guys. Nice music. Yeah, so I'm going to step you guys through how Black Tusk set up their integrated development pipeline for our next-gen video game. So I was told to give a little bit of background on myself, so I have a little bit of street cred here. I was a technical art director on FIFA. I thought it might be interesting to kind of call out what the integration level was on all these projects for the externalization. It was a non-integrated engagement for FIFA. We basically just would get heads or jerseys from the outsourcer in Maya, and then we would put those into the game ourselves. So I was a technical art director on the Skate series for 3 years, Skate 1 to 3. So that was also a non-integrated engagement. Characters, basic environments, things like level of details, things like that. So again, non-integrated. And what I kind of consider integrated is when you are hooked right into the mainline depot of the game and the vendor has the game engine as well. So these are all non-integrated. So then when I was technical art director on Need for Speed for about 2 years there, this was sort of my first round with integrated development, huge learning experience. We were integrated with characters and environments. Vehicles, we were not integrated. So this is the vendor was submitting art right into our game itself. So there was no middleman between the vendor and our game. So a huge learning experience there. It went fairly well. And so for the last 2.5 years, I've been at Black Tusk Studios here in Vancouver. We've been pretty laying low for the last while. We were formally announced about 9 months ago, but we've been actually working on a Xbox One title for quite a while. And I've basically been taking a lot of my learnings from Need for Speed and previous projects, working a lot with the smart people at Black Tusk and coming up with a fully integrated pipeline for characters, environments, weapons, gameplay animation, and cinematic animation. So I'll step you through sort of how we've set that up over the last while. So first things first, I have our E3 Black Tusk reveal teaser that was shown at E3 at the Microsoft press conference. If the guys could roll the clip, that would be sweet. So that was basically a teaser for our studio. That probably creates more questions than answers about what we're actually doing, I've noticed. But that, other than the last 5 seconds of that, that's all in-game assets running in our engine. So I'm going to step you through our team structure, integration, process, workflows, and metrics. And unfortunately, I don't have as many pretty pictures and videos as the Third Floor and Original Force guys. That stuff looked awesome. But I have a few photos here I'll keep this interesting with. So you always have to start with why. Golden circle, this is something I love to do with everything. Simon Sinek's TED Talk video, I'm sure some of you have seen that. Start with why and work your way out. Why, how, what. Nice quote from Simon Sinek here. The challenge we face doesn't scare us, and it's probably not that important, right? Externalization is pretty scary. And a lot of people don't bother with it. And then to go the next step and go with integrated externalization is scarier still. I believe that you have to really believe in what you're doing in terms of your tools, workflows, process, and pipelines to attain success when you're externalizing. If you don't really believe on it, you're going to be challenged, and you may fall back to the easier way out, which is maybe not integrating or not externalizing. So something to think about when you're watching this talk is sort of what do you believe about your asset creation process? So why is a technical art director concerned with outsourcing? Because I'm not an outsourcing manager, outsourcing producer. My day job is actually being the technical art director on the project, but I happen to also deal with outsourcing. So I believe that outsourcing is the purest manifestation of a proper, clean asset creation process. So you can't rely on the human pipeline or things like that when you're outsourcing. Things have to make sense. So how is a technical art director going to help you with outsourcing? Because the line has to be blurred to find success and efficiency, an outsourcing asset creation process and an asset creation process are the same thing now. I'd say as of a few years ago, if you're integrating, there's no difference. So I'm concerned with both then because I'm concerned with the internal team, and as a result, the external team matters to me as well. So what makes up this process? So I'll cover that right now. So quick checklist before starting, things to think about. Determine your level of integration. I'll be covering some of how you would do this later. Set up the internal team. Set up external vendor. I'm kind of brushing over things that are really hard to do actually, but not the focus of this talk. So establish communication channels, workflows and pipelines. And then when you started, gather metrics, refine, refine, refine. You're not really ever done externalizing or integrating. You basically are just constantly making it better. So team structure, this is important. It's definitely important to remove barriers between your leads and the vendor. So don't have too many middlemen. I like to set up teams in terms of pods, so cross-discipline groups of pods. This is pretty common now in a lot of game dev studios and film studios, where it's just a group of people working on a certain area of the game or film. So podifying, I call it. It's a really great way to promote ownership and ease scalability. So you got to grow, you can add another pod and continue to do that. It's good to be transparent to the vendor regarding your internal team structure. And then integrate the outsourcing process into all aspects of your team structure. Don't silo it off. And don't have like the outsourcing guys and you don't talk to them and lock them in a room. It's good to have it as part of your actual process. And this is kind of an important one that is hard to do, but if your reporting structures are horizontal on your team, but your pod structures are all vertical inherently because they're pods, if those don't line up, you sometimes can have trouble podifying properly. So it's good to have synergies there in reporting and pod structures. This is an example of what your team structure could look like. So you have a couple outsourced vendors feeding into various pods. Each pod kind of has specialization, either environments or characters or animation. Definitely good to have dedicated resources. So people like an outsourcing producer, you can have a senior artist devoted to it. Tech artists as well is important, especially in pre-production when you're setting up a lot of things. Integration, so I added this at the last minute, this slide, so it's step 0. So I didn't initially do this step 0, but after talking to some people and I realized this is pretty important, is you actually have to get the team to believe in fully integrating with the vendor initially. So fully integrating takes a leap of faith. Sometimes there are naysayers on the team. There always will be. Common naysayer symptoms. Us versus them comments, never we. The smallest mistake from the vendor results in a disproportional negative reaction. So I can't believe they just did that, and it's just a minor tweak needed. Another common symptom is trying to silo the vendor off. You'll see that sometimes if they don't quite believe in the process, they'll kind of just maybe put them off in the corner. And also another symptom of that is proper vendor training. They don't spend the time to actually train the vendor properly and assume they should just know. And that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's quite dangerous. You do a lot of these things, and of course it's not going to work. And then you're just reaffirmed in your belief that externalization and integration with that is not a good idea. So some ways to mitigate this. The easiest and most expensive way to mitigate it is send the person to the vendor. That will immediately usually make them a believer. You can also, of course, obvious things like put them in conference calls with the vendor. Make sure that they realize when the high quality assets come in, they notice it. Make sure that when the first few assets that come in don't break the build, that you kind of point that out. And usually, honestly, this kind of comes from a place of insecurity. So, try and find the source and address it and just talk to that person. So it's funny to be talking about this, but it's still, I feel like it needs to be said. Yeah, like I said, I didn't initially have this in. So on to more technical stuff here. I'm the technical guy. So I got to give them depot access, step one. So removes the integration step. This is really important, right? Otherwise, you're hiring an army of technical artists and people locally to bring your assets in. So it allows them visibility. Use caution, of course. Those are sensitive information in your depot. You might have to fence it off. Allow them to submit into your mainline. So just let them submit right into your game engine mainline. Don't fence them off into an outsourcing folder. Obviously, you must have a pipeline resilient to bad content. So yeah, this does sort of assume your engine is able to handle some sort of bad content, or your film pipeline or whatnot. Not mentioning any names, but I definitely know of studios that have a pipeline that's just so rigid they have no ability to outsource at all. So it's definitely something to be aware of when you're creating that. And then give them a lot of tools to debug when something goes wrong. Yeah, resist creating any folders in your depot called outsourcing. Step two, toolset. Share the PC visualizer toolset. You get a huge asset quality bump. You can preview in engine, obviously. Huge time savings. You don't have to integrate, like I said. Allows more outsourcing flexibility. If you're in a bind later, maybe they can do lighting. Maybe they can do visual effects. We've outsourced things like this in the past. But you can't do that unless they have the engine. Allows the vendor more visibility and context as well. So they can see where the object will be placed. They can open the level and see that, oh, this object's actually up in the rafters. I don't actually have to put that much detail into it. Can I reuse other assets, borrow textures that we've built? Last asset reworking later, of course. There's alternatives to this. So you can ship consoles to the vendor. This can be tricky. It's sort of a gray area. I think for current gen consoles, it's semi-legal now, but for next gen consoles, I don't think people are bringing PS4s and Xbox Ones yet over, or at least not talking about it, if it's happening. So this can be a bit of a hassle, red tape. It's a slow workflow as well to deploy to a console, but could still be worth it for the benefits listed above. There's another alternative as well. You could have a console running in the cloud. If you have like Windows Azure or something like that, you could have a cloud system running the console, and then allow the vendor to plug into that. This is a little bit kind of cutting edge stuff. We'd have to test this out, but maybe someone's doing it. Timing, training, really important, very important for integrated outsourced development. So always best at workflow inflection points, more proactive and hopefully less reactive, and regular intervals. So you can see in the chart here, time left to right, workflow complexity, top to bottom there. So every time there's a new workflow introduced, usually during pre-production, you usually want to time a training trip a few weeks after that, just to basically make sure they're all on board with the new workflows. Don't just assume they're going to figure it out, or it's usually best to go there in person if you can. Training team, pre-production, usually multidisciplined, open-minded. There are points of contact on your team, strong communication skills, strong IT skills a plus. There's always some sort of technical issue usually you have to work through, especially, again, with integrated development. They're trying to run your game engine over on the other side of the planet. So you need to make sure there's usually a bit more technical dependencies there. So it's good to have some IT support. So for us at Black Tusk, yeah, our training teams for production are more art-focused. No tech art, hopefully necessary in production, and sometimes can be more reactionary, unfortunately, like levels behind schedule, but hopefully not. And then, of course, there's embedded resource, which is also an option, but it's a nice luxury. If you have the ability to send someone to live on the other side of the planet, then that's good, but they will have to come back once in a while for retraining. So our first training trip at Black Tusk was a CG supervisor, a senior technical artist, art leads, and a senior producer. Lesson plan, got to make one. Add buffer for translation, double the time. Expect technical hiccups. Capture video, audio if possible, but it can be tough sometimes to capture that. Get the vendor excited about your project. Explain the why for your workflows. So basically explain where you're coming from as much as you can, not just exactly what they're doing. And leave time for asset reviews. That's pretty important. So an example of our first day lesson plan when we went over was Maya workflows was 2 hours, in-engine asset setup 2 hours, environment shader overview 2 hours, so something like that, and then a art tech review at the end of the day. So documentation, really important, again, for fully integrated engagement. So we use Microsoft OneNote, and I like to think it's not just because we're Microsoft. I think it's a pretty good app. So this allows constant edits, no check-in, no check-out, it's all in the cloud. Multiple people can update the OneNote at the same time. Flexible formatting options, so you can type and put images and circle things, and so you can basically throw it in a SharePoint, share it with your vendor. Outsourcer can add translated tabs to the OneNote, so sometimes they can do that. You can just allow them to modify the OneNote themselves, which again can be scary, but it works out pretty well. And it's nice and portable. You can move it around, and the links don't need to be updated. It's pretty nice that way. And you can mix typing with graphics, like I mentioned. And you can also, of course, document all your pipelines and workflows. So this is what we did at Black Tusk. So we have a single OneNote that has every workflow and pipeline in it that we've ever made. So this is an image of it here on the right. And so categories on the top, subcategories on the side. So it's the same document used for the internal and the external team. So it's shared for both. We don't have it in 2 places, which is really, really nice. And again, resist writing up a new workflow in an email and sending it over. It's so easy to do that. But try and just immediately go to the OneNote, update the OneNote, then send out a link to everybody from the OneNote. And then always update in a central location. So we do our workbooks in OneNote as well. So they're essentially style guides for our assets. So it's OneNote file generated per location, subcategories on the right there. You can see that's a picture of one of our OneNote workbooks there. Subcategories are all assets on the right, mixture of images and text. And it's the art pod lead that's usually generating these for the vendor. And just be careful of the file sizes. Ensure you're attaching JPEGs. If you're just pasting into it from the clipboard, it can become gigabytes, and the vendor doesn't like that. And artists have a general template they work from. And these are actually used in a one-directional way. We don't put feedback in this tool. We just send it over to them and leave it for them to look at. And reviews, we don't have any revolutionary idea here. We're just using email. So basically, our reasoning for this is all of our feedback in OneNote would probably generate massive amounts of data that would make it difficult to navigate and to transfer overseas. But there's probably a better way to do this, so I'm happy to chat with people after about that. We do rarely revisit review feedback, so it is a little bit more disposable for us. Security, just remember, SkyDrive Pro, Office 365, Yammer, SharePoint are all secure websites and services. Not secure, Google Drive, SkyDrive, Gmail, Outlook.com, those are not secure. So, things like security are important for integration. So how far do you take integration? It is possible to become too integrated. I've been on either side of the fence. At various points in the project, you'll also want to be at different levels of integration, depending on where you're at, pre-production, production. So I try to distill this down to an equation, the externalization equation. So I'll cover that now. So it basically can be applied to any asset you're thinking about outsourcing. So B times I times D equals ER. So just humor me here for a second while I step through this. So B is basically your bandwidth ratio, so your external to internal artist ratio. So how many external artists is your internal art team supporting for this asset? That's your bandwidth. Your iteration, it's the asset iterations per day. So how often is this file basically changing on a daily basis? What's its rate of change? That can affect if you want to outsource that or not. A high level of iteration can make it quite difficult to outsource. And dependencies, so system dependencies. How many things would break if this thing wasn't built correctly or saved correctly? So the dependencies also would affect your ability to integrate. And then ER is externalization risk. So how risky is it for this asset to be built out of house? So the higher the number, the higher the risk. And also the higher the number, the more communication, mitigation, and resources needed. So an example case here. So we have basically asset placement in level map files. So if you were externalizing, the vendor was actually placing objects in the map and saving the level themselves. So this is a bandwidth ratio of 10 external to 2 internal, so 5 iterations per day. So that map file is saved about 5 times a day. There's a lot of dependencies in a map file. There's collision, audio, lighting, gameplay, and other things. So a high amount of dependencies. So this equals basically 100 externalization risk. What does that mean? It's up to you if that's high or low, but this could be quite risky. And I'm not saying don't outsource level management. That's not what I'm saying. You can do that. It's just you'd require a little bit more support to do that. Another example case, an environment asset. Same bandwidth ratio, 5 to 1. Iterations per day, 1. That asset will probably only change about once a day. Dependencies are collision and lighting. Lower amount of dependencies, so that equals basically an externalization risk of 10. So 10 times less than a level file. So probably safe to outsource. And I'd say a character asset would probably be even safer. So kind of, I was thinking it through and kind of running that equation on a few parts of the game, and I kind of made a quick list of kind of which is my take on what's the lowest risk to highest in terms of integration, outsourcing. So things like characters, cinematic animation, environments, I find are pretty safe these days to outsource that in an integrated fashion. Gameplay animation, visual effects, level assembly, I guess you could throw in lighting there as well. Those things are probably a little bit riskier to outsource, but also a pretty cool challenge. If you can pull that off, then you can come into XDS and talk about that. So our dividing line at Black Tusk for what we outsource and what we don't, sort of trying to talk a bit more about our actual experience here. So this is what the vendor does. They generate the asset in Maya or whatnot. They also make the textures in Photoshop, ZBrush. They make not just space sculpts. We outsource all the blend shapes for our characters, which can be hundreds. Then they do asset assembly in the toolset. So they make all the materials in the engine, collision meshes, LODs in the engine, all the textures. They set up the MIP maps, the gamma space of the textures in engine. They do all the light map UVs, and they also set up all the destruction systems for our assets in the engine. And then they validate their asset in a test level. That's an important step. And then when the asset gets to Black Tusk, we validate the asset in a test level as well, first step, and then place it in the game level, and then set up things like level design hookup, like pickup points, things like that that live in the level, not on the asset. So process and workflows. This is the stuff that I like to talk about. So your asset is only good as your weakest vertical here. So you have, basically, I like to think of it as 4 things that affect your ability to create a quality asset. You have process, you have time, resources, hardware capability, and talent. So you have to identify the limiters. So these are like I said, these are the 4 things that affect an asset in terms of real-time asset, because hardware capability is a little bit less of an issue for film, but still there. So your process impacts your time, your ability to externalize impacts your resources, and your workflows impacts your talent. So things like ZBrush workflows or Maya workflows, that impacts the art quality of the talent. So you must sort of tackle these areas aggressively and kind of identify where you're limited. So as I was doing this, I actually kind of noticed something cool, sort of a trend. So for simplicity's sake, let's consider time and resources the same bucket. So you can say for current gen, you're basically limited here by hardware capability in current gen right now. Your talent has figured out the workflows. Your time and resources, your process has gotten better, so you're able to crank out more content now. And also you're externalizing, right? So basically the hardware capability is probably the limiting factor for asset quality on a Xbox 360 or a PS3. For early next gen, so kind of where we are now-ish, next gen games might be initially limited by talent as artists adapt to less hardware limitations and the new workflows that come around with next gen game development, like things like height maps and higher poly sculpts and ZBrush. So you could maybe say that just the artistic quality might almost be the limiting factor right now. As you get to mid-next gen, basically, we'll figure out how to be building these assets to a pretty high quality in ZBrush and Maya. But then time and resources will potentially become the bottleneck as our process needs to improve now. We've got the workflows done. We need to improve our process. So that's basically going to be I'm guessing, our bottleneck in a few years. And then as process improves over time, like it always does, we may end up where current gen is right now. With basically hardware capabilities will be the limiting factor on next-gen games in about 5 years. I'm just guessing. So it ends back full circle. So it's good to be aware of these when you're basically tackling your process. So find your limiting vertical, focus on it aggressively, pull the levers that are appropriate, process workflows, externalization. So next-gen games aren't getting any smaller, becoming pretty huge. Another good thing with process and workflows, external vendor training is a great forcing function. So workflows and processes must be rock solid to ensure success at an external vendor. So workflows and process idiosyncrasies that would be tolerated or workable internally do not work externally. So I noticed a very common trend at Black Tusk was our workflows matured rapidly right before an outsourcing gate at Black Tusk, where we're like, oh, we got the vendor secured. OK, we got to get them working on assets. So you can't rely on the human pipeline when externalizing workflows. Crawl, walk, run. So when I say the human pipeline, I mean when your team is smaller and you go, oh, talk to Ben. He's the guy that knows how to do the UVs. And oh, talk to Chad. He's the ZBrush guy, and all that sort of thing. It doesn't work so well when you start externalizing. So you can see here that we have basically I called the kind of workflows first look, workflows alpha, and workflows beta, always occurring right before a training trip. So streamlining, a big problem for us at Black Tusk, to be honest, is we're making a huge game. Assets are expensive, and we need to speed things up, or else we're never going to get this game built. So automated LED creation, so that was one of the first things we did. This is probably one of the best calls we made on this project. We signed on with the Simplygon guys, and we automate all of our environment and character LODs now, and we're not looking back. It saved us 1 man day per asset, which can equal millions of dollars. Automated light map UV layout, so we just have tools to do that for us. We've been doing this for a while, so this is less new, but it saved us 0.25 man days per asset. We automated collision mesh generation, saved 0.25 days per asset. This stuff starts adding up when you have thousands of assets. Automated the Maya export process, so 0.2 man days per asset. And it's also all assets have the proper metadata associated with them. It's not up to the artist to pick it. We did things like tool-assisted texture pass generation. So this reduced texture generation by 2 days per asset. Creates high-quality texture passes, normal, AO, height, specular. Real-time iteration. And we update our workflow documentation constantly, and of course feed it back to the outsourced vendors. So you can kind of see on the right there is an image of our shader system there, all physically based. So I think it's important to share some of this stuff because I think next-gen development is still a bit of a mystery. So I'm trying to show a little bit more of what we're doing here. We also simplified shader parameters, physically based system, and artist working in engine, of course. Over-engineering, this is something that I believe in. So working on an unreleased platform carries a certain amount of unknown. Like just, for example, this morning news came out that the clock speed went up on the Xbox One by another 1.5 gigahertz. So that's case in point. Over-engineering is important. So this is at odds with streamlining. You have to find a balance. Need to keep our asset database as flexible as possible. It's a great mitigation tool for performance and memory. Allows final quality tweaks well past the asset has been built. So over-engineering details. We author our textures at 2x in-game resolution. We use Simplygon for rapid retopologizing. So we can basically model something to be a bit more expensive than we might think it is, and then just run Simplygon on it in the game and bring it back down to res if needed. We have tuning controls, of course, for LED, texture bias, things like that. We include a height map texture in all of our assets that we're kind of using, but not fully using yet. But the hope is that we'll find more use for it as the game goes on. But it's there, and people are making them. And I kind of feel like you can make one big bet tech risk per area, but probably not a good idea to make two. So you can make one big risk, like we're going to build environments this way, and no one's ever done that before, and it'll be a great CGraph or XDS talk. So we've made our bet, and hopefully we come back to talk about it in a few years. But yeah, don't make two bets maybe. These are decisions you need to make before your workflow first look in early pre-production. So you need to know how you're building all these assets pretty early on, or at least make educated bets. Keeping the art assets agile, essentially, I like to call it. Texture budgets. I kind of just wanted to talk a little bit about our budgets a bit, because again, NextGen has quite a bit of unknown around it still. So we determine our texture budgets by surface area of the object. We target 512 pixels per meter for a next-gen game, 256 pixels per meter for other channels sometimes. So that means most of our environment assets are 2048. And also we have shadow map and light map resolution. So these are all things we've had to figure out over time, but it's looking like shadow maps 16 pixels, so this is like your shadows. And indirect light is about 1 pixel per meter. And for characters, we're all 4,096 textures for everything. And then this is some fancy equation that's kind of been mangled by PowerPoint. But this is our kind of complicated, unnecessarily complicated poly budget algorithm that we're simplifying now and figuring out. But we decided pretty early on we had to make a dynamic equation to figure poly budget out that kind of figures out what the object's surface area based on bounding volume is. But generally, we're targeting about 125 vertices per square meter for props and 20 vertices per square meter for architecture like walls and floors. And our character budgets are about 35,000 vertices, which these at the time was pretty high when I decided that number, but these days it's starting to sound lower with some of the other budgets out there. But they look pretty good. So got to make a test environment. Critical to asset validation, make multiple times a day, proper lighting setup. I think most of you guys know this, but it's really important for next-gen games because you quite often have physically based material systems and a unified lighting system. So your reflections are very dependent on your lighting solution and things like that. This is our sort of workflow process. I won't step you through every step here, but basically it's Black Tusk to vendor iteration repeat. So nothing too new there. Workflow, talk a little bit about our workflow now. We made a tool in Maya called Cloud Atlas. It's written by David Coleman and Sinisha Karalik. They're both some awesome tech artists on our team. So this was important because we had all this structure in our game engine, but we didn't have a lot of structure on the Maya side. So we had to kind of mirror a bit of what the game engine was doing. So it takes the guesswork out of naming conventions, consistent naming conventions. All required metadata is in the assets. No assets are over budget. If the artist tries to export an asset that's over budget, it lets them know. And it solidifies export settings, so no bogus asset data being exported. And we use FBX for environments, Maya files for characters. And this was a controversial decision to put in Cloud Atlas. Like now it sort of might seem like, oh, that's what you do. But there was a lot of resistance when I first started trying to put this into our pipeline from the artists. But after about 5, I kind of guess when our art team was about 5 people or larger, and our external team grew from about 3 people or larger, we were no longer able to sustain the human pipeline in terms of like, go talk to Frank. He's the guy that knows, how to export to the engine. So yeah, we kind of found that at the time this was getting a lot of resistance, but it saved our butts. Metrics. So gather metrics. Definitely, you discover inefficiencies. You set up timelines, find bottlenecks, track dependencies, determine when the next training trip is necessary. If you start seeing asset numbers slide or there's a big delta between your internal artist numbers and your external artist numbers, that might mean it's time for a training trip coming up. This is sort of a screenshot from our sort of one of our tracking sheets. And look at asset creation from the top down as well as bottom up to get the full picture. So use case, we had this exact problem a few months ago. Our asset creation time was too high at the vendor. It was about 3x longer than an internal artist was taking. And we were wondering what was going on. So it was mitigated with workflow improvements. We're kind of saying, OK, we'll automate this for you, we'll do that, but it wasn't fully there. So we started looking at our metrics in terms of what was the vendor doing and what were we doing and what was the delta. We determined that diffuse was taking too long for them, but we didn't know why. So we actually had an outsourced training trip happening, so we went to the vendor to speak with them about that. So the results we found, the first thing we found was our workbooks that we were sending them with images of the object they were building. We weren't giving them enough pictures. We weren't giving them enough detail, so they were having to go and search for more images on Google Images and whatnot themselves. So that was taking them an extra day. Our textures at the time were like 4x in-game resolution. We were still trying to figure out where we were going to land budget-wise. So they had never painted textures at that resolution before, and they were having to build a lot of textures from scratch that normally they would just grab from their database. The diffuse, they were putting a bit too much detail in the diffuse instead of putting it into some of the other texture channels that we have. And we also decided we had to give them a good texture database to pull from. So all these 4 things were contributing to them taking 3 times longer for an asset than us. But as soon as we determined this, it was an overall huge win for our training. So before our trip, it was taking 10 days per asset at the vendor, and after our trip, it was down to 5 days per asset with no difference in quality. So some conclusions. Implement proper internal support staff, of course. Empower content creators with the ability to gather metrics on their assets. Your assets are only good as your weakest vertical. And if it is hardware, then that sucks, but hopefully it's not the hardware yet. Don't be too integrated or not integrated enough. Be honest with yourself. Use the externalization equation. Streamline workflows whenever possible. A mandate can actually save millions of dollars with next-gen games. Agile assets. Over-engineer by 10 to 20%. You'll have a better looking and performing game. Less rework later. Agile documentation. Use OneNote or equivalent for cloud-based collaboration and quick iteration. Agile workflows. Artists will always find edge cases that break your process, probably daily. So be flexible. Find ways to, if you have a strong core, then you can work with it. Gather metrics and track. Leverage middleware. I think it's important to be open-minded about leveraging middleware and not trying to build everything yourself. The games are just getting too big these days. And create tools that are the manifestation of your pipelines and workflows beliefs. So be open-minded, stand by the fundamentals, though, throughout production. Otherwise, you kind of have an inconsistent mess of assets that can be a problem. So I kind of feel like external development will be the best thing to happen to your internal asset creation process. It's really helped us at Black Tusk in terms of streamlining everything, making it very clean. We recently had about 10 artists roll onto our team at once, internal artists, and it was easy because we had all the documentation all set up already. We didn't have to go and do a huge training session, just a few hours. Everything was there because we were already working with a vendor to kind of help ramp on internal artists as well. So, just think about what do you believe about external development and how far you want to take that. So, special thanks to all these people that definitely contributed to creating the outsource asset creation process at Black Tusk. It wasn't just me. So, lots of people here doing lots of things, and our outsource partners as well who have been doing awesome work. And thank you.